Hello, everyone. For those of you that haven't met me yet, I am the Assistant Dean of Career Services. I started in May. My name is Sarah Bookbinder. I am really thrilled to be here to welcome you to this event, which was actually planned by the Rappaport Center, but it is being co-sponsored by the Career Services Office and the Criminal Law Society. For those of you, especially the one else who haven't encountered the Rappaport Center too much yet, it is an incredible resource that we have here at BCD. And I just wanted to, Lizzie Medvedow, who runs the program over there, she asked me to quickly put in a plug for their next program, which is on September 27th, which anyone who's interested in this type of work of public service careers should definitely be there. Okay, can you hear me? And that one is going to be another lunchtime one, right here, on race and wrongful convictions, which I know is of interest to a lot of us. It's going to be hosted by BC Professor Sharon Beckman, moderated by, with panelists Jeffrey Robinson, the Honorable Geraldine Hines, who is a former SJC judge, if you haven't met her, and Professor Sam Gross of the University of Michigan Law School, who actually was my criminal procedure professor and is a really wonderful person, who is the primary author of a 2022 annual report on exonerations, as well as Jared Adams, who is an exoneree and now a lawyer, an author, and the founder of a nonprofit. So that should be a really interesting program as well. So I personally am really excited about this panel. I've been excited since Lissy mentioned it to me. In law school, in my office, the CSO, I know one else have heard me talk a lot already this semester about first job stuff, right? We talk a lot about the first job when we're here in law school, but the truth is that legal careers are really long. And what a lot of people don't talk about it is at this point, very few people stay in their first job for more than a couple of years. And so we want you to be thinking about your first job, but also about your longer term goals. I heard the dean even say, we want to be preparing you for your next job and your job 20 years from now. And a lot of people will use their second and third jobs to find a little bit more of an alignment with their values, with their priorities, and with their interests. And so I think it's really, really important to law students. It's important for me, for law students to be able to hear from people who've had these really diverse and interesting careers, to hear about how they were able to bring public service into their careers over time in different ways. So that's why I think this panel is really important. This is Glenn Cunha, for those of you that haven't met him, and he is going to be moderating the panel, and he'll introduce the panelists, but I want to introduce you to Glenn, who is another incredible resource that this law school has here. Glenn, for those of you that don't know, is the retired Inspector General. That's the Inspector General, not one of, like you heard, of the state of Massachusetts. Sorry, I think that's cool. He served as the Inspector General from 2012 to 2022. During his tenure, the Office of the Inspector General doubled in size and fulfilled its legislative mandate to create specialized units which were charged with overseeing areas of state government. So that's the role of the Inspector General, is to oversee what's happening at the state level. And he expanded areas of oversee transportation funding, benefits programs in health and human services, and overtime at the state police. These are all pretty big stories in the news, so you can look back and see a lot of that. Prior to becoming the Inspector General, Glenn worked at the Attorney General's office, which is different from the Inspector General, as a managing attorney of the Criminal Bureau, overseeing 8 divisions, of which I was one, so we worked together at that time. I was in one. Prior to this, Glenn worked at the Suffolk County DA's office as an ADA and was Deputy Chief of the Child Abuse Unit and an ADA at the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office. Since he retired as Inspector General, he has returned to the Suffolk County DA, where he manages very high-level cases and their training program for new attorneys. Glenn graduated with a degree in economics from BC and has an MBA from Bentley University School of Management and a JD from Suffolk. Currently, he also teaches here. You guys might have him. I know some of his former students are in the room. He teaches professional responsibility and a 1L elective in government oversight, which you can all take in the spring. So I'll turn it over to Glenn. Thank you all very much for coming to BC.
Thanks so much, Sarah. I really appreciate that. And it's great to get reacquainted with Sarah back running the Career Center. Before I introduce our panelists, I just want to say one thing that piggybacks on what Sarah had said. The reason that I contacted Lizzie, whom I know and worked with the Rappaport Center when I was IG, we had a Rappaport fellow and tried to work closely with them. Last year, I think some of my former PR students are here. One of my final questions, and I'm not giving away anything to my current PR students because I already told them about this. One of the questions is, what area of law do you want to practice? And what are the rules of professional responsibility that may be implicated in that area of practice? And what I don't know if the word is shocked, but I was certainly amazed that out of 42 students, 5 were interested in public service. There were 4 who wanted to be defense attorneys and 1 who wanted to be a prosecutor, which I spent 20 years doing and went back to doing after being IG. So I talked to Lizzie and I said, listen, there's got to be a way at a place like I went here as an undergrad, a Jesuit institution that is teaching law students and hopefully impressing upon them the importance of public service and service to the community. Now, certainly you can do that through volunteer work and other ways, and work at a big firm and write the check to the charity of your choice and go to the food bank or whatever it might be, and volunteer on weekends. But what we're here today to do is to impart our experiences to you about careers in public service and nonprofits, and just how rewarding those careers have been. So with that, I'm going to introduce our esteemed panelists. Vanessa Velez is the Deputy Chief Counsel for the Private Counsel Division of the Committee for Public Counsel Services, CPCS, the Public Defender's Office. Then we have Ron Povich, who is counsel at Anderson Kreiger, but served in many roles in public service, most notably as Governor Deval Patrick's Chief Legal Counsel.
I think that's Governor Bailey.
I'm sorry, Governor. I'm sorry about that. Governor, a recent governor, but Chief Legal Counsel is very, he'll tell you more about that. Really important job for the governor. And Genevieve Nadeau, who is counsel at Protect Democracy and had also a career at the Mass Attorney General's office. So I'll start off and turn over the mic to Vanessa Velez, and she can give us a little bit of background on her career. We will have time, hopefully, if you have a burning question, go ahead and raise your hand, but we're gonna have about 20 minutes for questions at the end. So I hope that you can hold questions, but certainly if something comes up, please ask it. So Vanessa.
Thank you. It's gonna time myself. Can you all hear me?
No.
No?
Yeah.
Yes or no?
A little close.
Now?
Better.
Okay, great. So, what I can tell you is you need to choose a job you love, because when you do, you will never have to work a day in your life. That's a quote. And I can tell you that I don't regret going to law school. I absolutely love being an attorney. I knew when I went to law school that I wanted to do public service work. That was at the time where my heart was, and where it is right now too. I went to Suffolk Law, and I went to Suffolk Law night school. I knew that I couldn't afford going to law school during the day, so I worked, and then I went to law school at night. And in terms of my career path, I was a solo practitioner for a very short period of time, and I was part of a couple of law firms. I work currently at the Committee for Public Counsel Services. I actually started working my career at CPCS. I left, I went to a general law practice, and then eventually made my way back to CPCS. And when I went back, I first came in as a supervising attorney. Then I was the attorney in charge of the Public Defender's Division, the Boston office. And now during the past 4+ years, I've been the Deputy Chief Counsel of the Private Counsel Division. So CPCS is unique in that they have a Public Defender's Division, which is the staff, the full-time defense attorneys. And then there's the private counsel division, which is private attorneys, private contractors that take assignments from the court. One of the things that people do not know is that actually private attorneys do 60% of the indigent work in Massachusetts, and the public defenders division does 20%. So, and within the private counsel division, there are several units. There's the criminal adult, there's the appeals and post-conviction, the innocence program. We have a new unit, parole advocacy unit, immigration impact unit. We have a private social work services unit that provides social worker vendors, and the reason for that is to ensure that the private attorneys can get funds from the court to hire social workers to help them with their cases. And public defenders attorneys have in-house social service advocates, so we want to make sure that there's parity in terms of the representation that we provide to everyone in Massachusetts that it needs an attorney as an indigent. Let me see. Other things that I can tell you in terms of my position right now that I love is that it's very different in the sense that I oversee all these different divisions, and all these different divisions handle the certification, the training, the support for the private bar to do their best work. We do also a lot of oversight. It's pretty layered to ensure that people are zealously and competently represented in court. And the other part of my job is to help, as part of senior management, be able to help run the agency with other deputies. So there is a part of doing like implementing and fiscal, operational, legislative policies, I'm involved in. I unfortunately do not have the time to be able to carry a caseload and represent clients. So that's one thing that I missed about my current position. But I do it in a different way because I'm ensuring that people are getting the best representation, and also that the attorneys have the support and training that they need to do that. Also, in my position, I'm involved in strategic litigation issues as it relates to the agency, and also I do the preliminary reviews of amicus briefs for that are going to be writing on behalf of the private counsel division. And important causes for me is I feel that it's extremely important. I didn't get here on my own. I had a lot of support, from my family, from friends, from people that you get to meet during your career. And so I think it's really important to mentor others. So I do a lot of mentoring. I do a little bit of teaching. So I'm a faculty member with the Harvard Law School trial advocacy workshop. And also because of my position, it's just really cool to be able to be part of representing the agency in certain commissions. I was part of the commission that was looking into systemic racism within the probation department. So it was a study to ensure that, what's happening in terms of the treatment of people that are in the probation department. So I was part of that commission, and I've been part of some other work on behalf of the agency, representing the agency. And that also has been, just makes my job really interesting, very fulfilling. I do love what I do. So that I can certainly tell you. Let me see what else. CPCS, if you are interested or you're not sure, you have an opportunity to do internships. You have opportunities to do 303, and I know that Glenn's going to talk a little bit about that. There is loan forgiveness for staff, but also for private bar. So the private bar There's also now the opportunity for loan forgiveness. Oops, that's,
So,
yes. So my time is up. But lastly, I just want to say, I really encourage you to consider a career in public service. It's extremely rewarding. And you do have opportunities while you're here in school to at least test it out and see what it is all about and if it's something that you would like to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn, and nice to see you all today. I've had a long journey in the law, so I'm happy to talk in detail about any of the roles that I've had. I have the question and answer or afterwards, but I'll just sort of give you the overview. And since we were encouraged to share a little bit of a personal story, I'll start with the fact that I grew up in Bath, Maine, which is a relatively small town up on the coast of Maine, which I'm very fond, and I was really, but from a young age, for some reason, I always wanted to be a lawyer. I think it's because in my small town, my father was a merchant, as was my grandfather. They ran a men's clothing store, and they used to hang out downtown. And all the lawyers, they were mostly men, but they were the guys who had offices above these small stores, and they seemed really active in public life and had interesting jobs and got to stand up and talk in front of people. And those three things appealed to me. So I started on this idea I want to be a lawyer early on. I got very lucky. I got into Dartmouth. I was at Dartmouth, and when I was at Dartmouth, I came back and I worked in the governor's office in Maine as an intern because I was already really interested in state government. And I was assigned to work for the governor's chief legal counsel in a very small office, about 8 staffers. So I decided at that point maybe I wasn't going to run to be governor of Maine, which was my thought at the time, but maybe humbly as I could. Maybe I could have one of these staff jobs. So anyway, so I graduated from Dartmouth. I get lucky, I go to Harvard Law School, and all intended to come back to Maine. And part of that, I clerk for the Chief Justice of the Maine Supreme Judicial Court. But then I always quote Bill Clinton at this point in the story. Bill Clinton once said that he went to law school and he met a girl. So I didn't meet Hillary, but I met my wonderful wife, which is good as Hillary. And but she was having none of this Maine thing. So we compromised and we came back to Boston for what I thought was 3 years. Well, it's been certainly more than 30 years, and 3 decades in, you can see I'm halfway done of my 2 goals of coming back to Boston to be with her and moving back to Maine. So halfway done. I came back to Boston. I went to a big law firm, the firm I worked one summer at. That was the firm now known as Goodwin. I was a civil litigator at Goodwin. I learned a lot about practicing law in that context, but obviously I didn't get any trial work as it is now, as it was then. So I went off to the United States Attorney's Office with the help of a mentor that I made at a firm, a guy by the name of Brackett Anderson. After I was in the U.S. Attorney's Office, assigned to the White Collar Crime Division for about 4 years. I tried a bunch of cases. I did some First Circuit appeals. It was terrific. Brackett became Chief Legal Counsel to Governor William Weld, who was the governor of Massachusetts in the 90s. And he called me up and said, I need a deputy chief legal counsel. I know you like state government. Do you want to come work with me and Bill Weld? And the unvarnished, not to be repeated outside the room version is, well, my reaction was, well, you guys are Republicans and I'm a Democrat. Why would I do that? And the response was, Weld's a great guy. You're really going to find him charming. Why don't you come and meet with him? So I came and met with him, and I did love state government, and I found Governor charming, and I was very flattered that my mentor, who was a hard grader, had invited me. And I went off to the governor's legal office to be deputy chief legal counsel, my second role in the public sector at that point. And I worked on all kinds of legislative projects. I worked on an early version of Native American gaming. I worked on improvements to what became Gillette Stadium. I had a great time. But the reality of it was, after 2.5 years, my wife, who had practiced both at Choate Hall and then in-house counsel, we had our second child, and she wanted to stay at home. And, one of the realities is, working in the governor's legal office in that period of time, I was making about $55,000. And we had 2 kids, and she wanted to take time to be in the community and at home with the kids. So that sort of pushed me to go back to the private sector. And I made an odd move because I really was a litigator, but I made the move that I called the headhunter and said, I'm not sure I want to go back to a law firm at this point. Like, any in-house roles out there? I tried to sell my governor's legal office job as an in-house role. And she said, well, there's this firm called Boston Consulting Group, BCG. They're a big international consulting firm. They've never had a general counsel before. They really like you. I have no idea what it meant. I don't know now what it meant. I only know I spent 11 years at BCG, being the general counsel, flying around the world, giving advice to really smart folks globally. We had a lot of training. It was great. Totally different than my other roles. After 11 years at BCG, I decided I wanted to be closer to home. I decided I wanted to work for a public company. At that point, through some folks I met, I learned that BJ's Wholesale Club, which is a great company, but the other end of the world from BCG, was looking for a general counsel. It had all the things I wanted. It was about 5 miles from my house. It was a publicly traded company. I could learn all that. It had, it was a real, real traditional business, 20,000 employees, 250 locations, all that. So I said, okay, I'll go here for a few years and see how it was. And then I thought I would go to a different public company with maybe a more cutting edge business. But that, the private equity guy came into BCG just, after about 3 years of my time there. That's about the timeline I thought I would look for more work, for different work. And the board didn't want to sell. So that was a very interesting fight. We were supported by Wilmer Hale in that. It took about 1.5 years. And we sold to the private equity guys, and they did all kinds of magical legal stuff. So that got me to about year 6. And in year 6, 2 people I knew well, Charlie Baker from my time in the Weld administration, and Martha Coakley, who I knew both from Goodwin and from the U.S. Attorney's Office, were running against each other for governor. And I thought, gee, maybe one of them would hire me if one of them gets to be governor. I'm almost done. So, so I stayed very quiet and very low, and it didn't take sides. And then Charlie Baker won, and I knew him a little bit, but not a lot. And he was nice enough to call me up, and I went and talked to him about becoming his chief legal counsel, which was very kind of him. And he offered me that job. And it was a great, great job. The governor's legal counsel is involved in almost all the issues that face state government, both the legal ones and the policy ones. It's a very full-time job. I felt very fully utilized in that job, but I loved every day of it. Once I actually said to him, I came into his office late at night. We worked very hard. I said to him, Governor, if a day goes by and I forget to thank you for giving me this job, it's just an oversight, and I apologize. But I really felt that strongly about it. I helped him appoint 133 judges to the courts of Massachusetts, including 5 of the 7 justices on the SJC, and that was clearly a highlight. But after 4.5 years, it was probably time to go do something else. I considered a lot of things, but I went to the medium-sized law firm at Anderson Kreiger, where I now am. I mostly represent state agencies and state entities, occasionally people who have issues with those, but I'd really rather be on the state side of, the perfectly fine work of representing people for state agencies, but I really like to be on the state side. So I've represented the Gaming Commission, Massport, the Registry of Motor Vehicles. I did a lot of work during COVID at the COVID Command Center. I helped set up the Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission and all that sort of stuff. So that's the long story that's brought me here today. I've also tried to mingle in some board work on nonprofits like the Greater Boston Food Bank. I served on judicial nominating commissions for Governors Romney and Patrick for about 7 years, and now I'm currently on the board at Adjunct the Jewish Community Relations Council, and UTEC, which is a organization up in Lawrence for criminally involved youth. So, I think you can have a great and varied career in the law. You should always look for jobs that stoke your passions and you like the work. Because the thing about being a lawyer is in most jobs, you're going to work hard or be put under pressure to work hard. And if you like the work, as Vanessa said, it makes it much easier to do the work. But I always tell people they should look at 4 things. They should look at what the work is and what you're going to do every day. They should look at how demanding it is time-wise, because sometimes you have other family obligations and things and community obligations you want to spend time on. And that's important. That changes over time. You have to think about what it pays, to be honest, and how that fits in with what you need to live the life that you want to live. And the fourth point I always encourage people to think about is, if it's not your dream job, is it a step closer to getting your dream job? Because people do move. So what you do every day, the balance of the pay, the balance of the time, and how it fits in your career path is the high level advice I give lots of people when they ask me how I decided what to do and how I came to this. And the last thing I want to just emphasize beyond everything else is you have to be lucky. You have to do good work, but what you have to make good relationships. But when opportunities come your way through good fortune and good contacts, you have to decide, is this something I can do? And do I want to go do it? Because there's plenty of work to do as a lawyer, and if you keep your head down, you might miss some great opportunities. So that's sort of the last, I don't want to say how many years, many years, in its context that I hope is helpful, and I'm really happy to answer questions now, not actually in the panel or later.
Great. Thanks, Lon. Genevieve?
Hi, everyone. So I'm a counsel at a nonpartisan nonprofit called Protect Democracy. This is, I think, my 6th job. I was just counting. Protect Democracy's mission. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it. I'd be really impressed if anyone has. But we're relatively new, about 6 years old nonprofit. We just hit 100 employees. And our mission is to prevent American democracy from declining into a more authoritarian form of government, which is the thing I used to feel funny about saying and would like engender some eye rolls in the beginning, but not so much anymore. And so I'll say a little bit more about what I do there, but how did I get here? I went to UMass Amherst as an undergrad. I'm from Massachusetts. And then after that, I went all the way to the West Coast to Stanford for law school, where I stayed for quite a while. Prior to going to law school, my only model for a lawyer had been my dad, who was in public service. And so I will confess that when I got to Stanford and sort of saw what else was out there, I was intrigued by law firm life for a number of reasons, one of which I think you can probably imagine was top of the list. So I started my career in the private sector at law firms. I worked at 2 fairly large law firms. First in Los Angeles, like I said, I stayed in California, and then eventually in New York. And I practiced litigation in their employment law departments, doing sort of management side and some litigation and sort of policy and advice work. I did that for about 6 or 7 years, I think, and decided that the law firm life was sort of no longer for me. I was sort of missing what I had originally thought of myself doing when I first went to law school, which is more in the sort of public service arena. I was also really intrigued with the politics of the day. And so I ended up leaving the law firm to volunteer, in other words, work for free, for the first Obama presidential campaign. So I did that in a sort of combination of Washington, D.C. and Chicago, which was really fascinating. I felt very lucky just to sort of be there and be a sort of witness to the history of all of that. And from there, it took me a little while to figure out where I was going to go from there, to be honest. But I ultimately ended up in the general counsel's office at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. I was in DC then. I was there for a couple of years. Did some really interesting work. Actually did continue the sort of employment law work I've been doing, but internal to the federal government. And also did some interesting work around, folks remember Deepwater Horizon. It was the oil spill off the coast of Louisiana. So some really interesting things. Overall, I did not love working for a huge federal bureaucracy. I was also, so I don't have kids, but I now have 5 nieces and nephews, and that was sort of the beginning of it. And so I felt a real pull to come back to Massachusetts, where my whole family is, and to sort of get to closer to what my view of public service had been. So I made this sort of transition from the private sector and law firm life to the government, but was still doing sort of defensive work. It felt like defense side work, and I really wanted to do more affirmative social justice related work. And a friend of mine sent me a job posting from the Attorney General's office here in Massachusetts to work in the Civil Rights Division. And that very thankfully worked out. So I moved from DC back to Massachusetts. where it had been probably by that point, 8 or 9 years, I think I'd been away. And then I was at the AGO for about 7 years. I started out as an assistant AD in the Civil Rights Division, sort of worked my way up as deputy chief for a period of time, and then chief of the division. Really amazing place to work. And I sort of subjectively think a really interesting position within the government. So sort of in a prosecutorial type role, but real enforcing civil rights laws. Which to me was sort of like the best of many worlds. Like litigated cases, did a lot of policy work, worked very closely with the legislature and others on the Massachusetts Equal Pay Act, which is now like several years ago, was a big deal at the time, and also did a lot of sort of community engagement and education kind of work. So really got to do just a wide range of really cool things. So I was there for 7 years, which was I think at least like double where I'd been anywhere else by that point. So eventually was ready for something kind of different. And I was chief of the division when President Trump was elected. And a lot of my work, an increasing amount of my work was sort of facing the federal government, opposing the federal government to be specific. And it sort of became clear to me then, just sort of what a sort of existential threat or set of threats our democracy was facing at the time. And I became aware of this nonprofit organization doing really interesting work in the sort of pro-democracy, anti-authoritarianism space. And somehow convinced them to hire me, and they did. So I'm a counsel, that's, I don't know why, we have some funky titles in the organization. But I'm a counsel, I'm also what we call an impact manager, which means I sort of manage a team of attorneys and paralegals and policy advocates and communications professionals, doing again, a wide range of sort of policy work. I don't know if folks know what the Electoral Count Act is. It was a statute that governs how presidential elections are run in many respects. Worked a lot on revising that after the events of January 6th, 2021. Also do litigation and a wide range of things, but I'm happy to say more about. But it's been a really sort of interesting path for me. I very much agree with Lon sort of 4 things. You know, I would just say like along the way, I've never quite known where I was going, what my plan was. I have like no grand plan for where I'll end up in my career. I just sort of kept an open mind and tried to make choices that were really meaningful to me at the time. And that has sometimes changed over the years, but look for work that was meaningful. And the one thing I will just add is that part of my choice to go to Protect Democracy or to join Protect Democracy was focused on the culture of the organization. And I would say that was the first time that element of a workplace had sort of ranked so highly for me in terms of my sort of job choice. And it's something that my organization really puts front and center and focuses on a lot. They interview for that a lot. And I'm happy to say more about that as well. But I would just sort of add that as I've gone through my career and sort of being at a place that is a healthy place with good people has been sort of increasingly important to me. So I'll stop there for now. Yeah.
Thanks, Jean-Pierre. I just have to credit Lissy on this one because she picked the panelists. And I just want to let you know, like, you're not going to get better people with this kind of experience. So I'm looking forward to when we get to the point where we're asking questions, because the types of careers that the 3 of them have had, and I'm going to take a little time to talk about my career, is exactly what I was looking for to be able to present to you today. So Sarah spoke a little bit about, you know, my education and gave a little bit of background to my career. But I want to talk about and echo some of the themes that the panelists have talked about. In that, number one, I didn't have some grand career plan. And I'm sure some of you think you have to have this grand career plan. You know, you're probably in your 20s, maybe early 30s. And you're thinking, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my career. And I'd say for my career, it's been broken up into like 8-10-year chunks. That has brought me to today. And my career didn't start off in law. I graduated from BC and I want to make money. And so I worked for a big hospital supply company doing sales. And I think in the end, that sales position really led me to being a trial attorney. Like I knew, and I would sometimes look back on times that I was in the midst of trials and I would think about the concepts of things that I learned and some of the sales trainings I had, because as I was doing lots of jury trials, that's what I was doing, was trying to convince the jurors, trying to sell them the facts as I saw them. So, but while I was working for this big hospital supply company, I knew when I was at BC, I knew that I wanted to go into public service. And I knew I wanted to be a lawyer. I just didn't know when that was going to happen. The company that I worked for, when you work for these big companies, they paid for me to get an MBA. So I was able to do that. But I knew, and I did the service, I had to get the MBA and stay 3 more years. I finished the 3 years and left and went to law school. And while I was in law school, and this is the whole point of internships and externships and what Vanessa talked about, I thought I wanted to be a defense attorney. Like I focused, when I was in criminal law, what I was focused on was how to be a good defense attorney. What are the things I need to know? I took the clinic on, the defender clinic, and that was when I figured out I wanted to be a prosecutor, because I worked with lots of victims in those cases, and domestic violence victims, and even the instructor that I had, who was I think she had worked at CPCS in her career and was doing this, and her advice was always, whenever you have a case with a victim, work with the victim, figure out what the victim wants, and that's what you're going to present to not only the prosecutor but the judge, because this is what the victim wants, and hopefully you can convince the judge. And typically a victim in these district court cases, the lower level DVK, they aren't looking for the guy to go to prison for the rest of his life. What typically the victims are looking for, get the guy some help, keep him out of jail. And that's exactly what I learned with a lot of victims, were somewhat compassionate about the people they were in relationships with, or whatever it might have happened. They just want to get out of the relationship, but they're like, this guy needs help. And I always felt like I related to that. So I graduated from law school and realized, with all this defense background, I want to be a prosecutor. Well, back in the 90s, it was not easy to become a prosecutor. I felt like, that's why I was shocked in my class when, I felt like when I graduated, like half of the people wanted to be prosecutors and wanted to be defense attorneys. Only a few were looking to go to big law firms. So I had to volunteer. I eventually got, I didn't get the job. I got an opportunity to volunteer at the Norfolk DA's office. And I'd already passed the bar by the time I got in there. So I knew I wanted to be a trial attorney. So some of you have either worked at a DA's office yet in one of the district courts, or will work at a DA's office maybe. You'll see there's some people who like to do trials. There's some people who are at the DA's office, it's like put on their resume. And I was a person who wanted to do trials, so they knew that. And there were some people that would come in, and district court trials, a lot of times, there isn't that much prep that you can go into. You have a caseload of about 300 to 400 cases. You might prep like 4 cases for trial. It's a packed courtroom and the judge decides on your case it's going to go. And there were times people were like, hey, you want to try this case? I was like a dog with a bone. Anytime I would take any case, I didn't care if it was a dog or whatever. I just wanted to get in front of a jury. I wanted to be able to try cases, question witnesses, practice my opening and closing skills. And so I eventually got a paying job at the DA's office. Now I know there's inflation and all that kind of stuff. But in 1995, I graduated from BC. I had 7 years as I did well with sales, had an MBA, and I got the job at the DA's office, $25,000 a year. Now, I did that because that was the job I wanted to do. I was fortunate. I had already paid off my BC loans, and because I had that job, I was at law school, I think in the early 90s, you don't want to hear this, but I think it was like $10,000 a year. So I was able to kind of pay as I went, and got out, and I was able to work for $25,000 a year. But it was, working at the DA's office was just the best job I could have ever had, because I love trying cases. I started off working in the DV unit, then I went to the district court, another district court, and they just had me doing everything from operating under the influence, drug cases, assault and batteries of like knuckleheads in a bar, eating each other up, those kinds of cases. And then I left Norfolk because I lived in Boston. I'd always wanted to work with the Suffolk DA's office, and I got a job working there. Started off in the Roxbury District Court. That's probably where I met Vanessa. We had cases together. Then people knew that I was interested in doing victim cases. went to the child abuse unit, worked my way up to becoming the deputy chief there. But then I had kids and realized, one, I couldn't keep up this trial schedule that I had, because even when I was in child abuse, I know I have one of the 9th floor alumni at the Suffolk DA's office. In the Suffolk DA's office, the 9th floor is really all the victim units are up here. So even though I was doing child abuse, I got DV cases, sexual assault cases, I was on the homicide response team. So sometimes they give you a motor vehicle homicide that you ended up showing up that night, whatever time it was, 3 a.m, and they give you that case and you'd investigate it and prosecute it. And I did get a couple of motor vehicle homicide trials out of that, but it was time for me. I just couldn't keep it up. Lon said he was making 55. When he said that, I was making $55,000 running a unit on the homicide response team, 2 kids, diapers, you're going to be in this situation, daycare. It just was somewhat irresponsible at that point. And so this opportunity, I didn't have the opportunity because I didn't want an opportunity to go into a private law firm, but I at least was able to go to the AG's office. It was a significant salary increase to run one of the white collar divisions, because at least I had trial experience. Didn't have experience doing white collar crime, but I felt like this isn't rocket science. I mean, it's the law and I know how to try cases. I'm going to do this. And went to the AG's office. So I was a DA probably about 10 years between Suffolk and Norfolk. Went to the AG's office for about 8.5 years, did insurance fraud, white collar crime, public corruption, worked my way up to managing the criminal bureau in my last 2 years there. And I think it was either Genevieve or Lon that said this, I think it was Genevieve, I didn't have a career path. I was just going to these jobs that I love. Well, one day I get a call from the first assistant. I thought he was in trouble because he had this kind of attitude like, Glenn, get out here. Martha wants to talk to you. Oh my God, what did I do? I'm thinking, I go there. That's my personality. Like, what did I do? Rather than, hey, they're gonna give me an award. So I go upstairs and the search for the Inspector General had fallen apart. And there were some issues with the finalists, and they had said, the governor needs a plan B. And we think you're the plan B. You got to go through the whole process. We need you to apply if you want to do this. Like, first, what did the IG do? I mean, I kind of knew, but I'd never had cases with the IG. So thought about it. I said, kind of the weekend. No, you have until like 5 o'clock today because we've got to move this process along. So, the IG's office prevents and detects fraud, waste, and abuse in the expenditure of government funds. That's a huge mandate. And it's not just state, it's federal, and it could be a nonprofit that's getting federal or state funds. So it was a huge, broad mandate. But I thought, okay, I'll do this, and it worked out. Met with the governor, we hit it off, and then met with the auditor, and obviously I worked for the AG for years. So I spent 10 years in the IG's office, and in some regards, that job got me to ultimately what I had always really wanted to do was teach at law school, and so other, lucky kinds of things that had happened. I met Sharon Beckman, who is a law professor here, and she's at the next training program. She went to college with my sister, and we swam together. And one day she heard my name. She came up, she said, "Do you have a sister Joyce? I went to Harvard, blah, blah, blah." We were classmates. And what do you do? I work at BC Law. I'm like, oh, I'd love to work at BC Law someday. Well, for those of you with 3 L's, when you guys came in, that bump class 4 sections, that was my opportunity because they were looking for, they needed 4 more 1L electives for that 4th section. And I had to put together a proposal, and Sharon had said, in law school, they don't learn a lot about government oversight. That just isn't something that you should put together a program about government oversight and what IGs do. So I did. Dean Lyons, who's now become a friend, but it was a great course. And now, I've taught that 3 times. And, I was term limited as the IG. So I finished that. I had 30 years of public service, retired, and had like 3 weeks of golf and tennis. And then I got a call from the Suffolk DA, who I had worked with when we were at the DA's office. He was appointed and he was running for a full term. And there was this case that had been dogging him during the campaign and said, will you take this case on and do, just do an independent investigation? I'm gonna leave it up to you. You decide whether charges should come up. Their 4-month investigation, the grand jury brought in all the witnesses, everything, decided not to take out charges because I wrote a report that was public and in the paper. And that was why the facts did not support it. That was why I didn't take out charges. And the DA had said, stay on. I'd love to give you other conflict cases. And another thing that just falls into place, I didn't plan to do this either. I took the cases that were coming through. The professional development director leaves. There's a big training going on the next week. Everybody's kind of wringing their hands. Who's going to do this training? Like, what's the topic? Are there some slides? I'll do it. So I do the training. Everybody thinks it's a great training. Will you start doing trainings? And last week, I just trained 24 of the new class of ADAs that came into the Suffolk DA's office. And it was a great opportunity for me. One, I've been teaching law students, but to see these 24 people, it's the biggest class we ever had. I think the DA's office never had more than 15. But just to see the enthusiasm and the interest that people have to get into court. And, one of the things we talked about was ethics, which is what I teach, but also the vast responsibilities that prosecutors have. One of the things, and so I had put together the training, one of the things I brought in was an old friend of mine from the DA's office, who's a retired judge, and he came in to give a view from the bench. And, this is a guy who was a prosecutor for 20 years, a judge for 20 years. And what he said, and I tend to agree with this, is that the most powerful person in the courtroom isn't the judge, it's the prosecutor. Now, the judge does the sentencing, but as everything's going on, as you're litigating the case, it's the prosecutor that's taken out the charges. Nobody can get a prosecutor to dismiss the charges. She's got the discretion to dismiss the charges. And fortunately, over the years, things have changed in that discovery obligations, which is a big part of any kind of controversy or any issues. The prosecutor, you may read about some of these cases. You're probably going to hear about them in this next Rappaport program when Sharon comes in to talk about erroneous convictions, because discovery obligations weren't taken as seriously as they should have been. 30, 40 years ago. I tell a story also about learning about my discovery obligations when I first became a prosecutor. I talked to my supervisor then, who's now a judge, and I called her up. It was in the Quincy District Court. She was in Dedham. And I called and I said, Marianne, I've got this document that let me stop right there. Turn it over. She's like, you got anything? Just turn. I mean, this is before any of these controversies came out. She was ahead of her time. Just turn everything over. I don't even want to talk about what the document is. Click. She was a busy person. And so I learned then, just turn everything over. And that's what I've done. And now it's even gotten to a point where not only do you turn everything over, but you may know of something, or you may have heard of something, and you turn that over. There may be some documents at such and such a place that isn't a state actor. You might want to go find this. I mean, typically you can tell the defense to do that, but you're going to want to get it yourself. So for me, I have had a career that has been just extremely rewarding. Every day, for the most part, I've enjoyed getting up, going to work, doing all the different kinds of cases that I've had, from, like I said, just basic hand-to-hand drug cases and OUIs to serious rapes, sexual assaults, and homicides. And for me, it's been extremely rewarding. So I do want to talk a little bit before I open it up to everybody about Vanessa mentioned it, and this will lead to my first question to the panel, is that there are opportunities. Some of you probably already have your jobs for next summer, and you might be working at a big firm, but you're also thinking, geez, all of this stuff sounds great. I've watched Law and Order. I've watched, all of these procedural type shows. I'd love to see what it would be like to be a defense attorney. You may have this thought like, oh, prosecutors, they're all liars. They work for the cops who are all, liars. Just this is what the media wants you to think, which isn't true. But you may have that perception, like, I'm going to be a defense attorney. But that's the way I want to be a defense attorney. I thought everybody's innocent. These cops are going after people. And then when I started defending people, I realized I'm really just trying to get the person the best deal possible, because all the evidence shows this guy did it. So I've got to do the best I can to protect his liberty. And so, I think if there's an opportunity that if you want an opportunity to try this out, whether it's through an externship program, that BC has relationships with federal, state agencies, prosecutors, all the DA's offices, CPCS. They have relationships with nonprofits where you can work there and you get credit for doing these externships. If you haven't gotten your summer job yet and you're interested in doing a summer internship where you may get paid, if you don't get paid, there is the PILF program where you can get, I think it's, like $4,000 for the summer. And then you essentially volunteer at whatever agency it might be and the school gives you. Vanessa mentioned loan forgiveness. I've learned all about loan forgiveness in preparation for this. BC has its own loan forgiveness program. If you make under $100,000 a year and you're working in public interest for any kind of a public interest job, you can get at a minimum 50% of your loans, meaning you owe $1,000 a month, you're going to get $500 from BC. And the Bellotti Foundation, which funds that, has been doing very well lately. And from what I understand, last year, it was much more than 50% that they were able to give the people who qualified for loan forgiveness. So, say it goes up to 75%, which means you owe $1,000, and you get $750 a month for your loan forgiveness. So what I want to open up to groups, and I'll start with Vanessa. We talked about internships and externships. What's your experience with throughout your career? I know right now you said you don't have cases, but throughout your career, working with students and how you've either mentored them or helped them understand what it's like to be an attorney at CPCS while they've done an internship or an externship.
It's really exciting. It's really interesting. You're assigned to a unit at CPCS, whether it's criminal defense, whether it's children and family law, whether it's youth advocacy division, mental health, and you work with an attorney. You go to court. Under 303, you can. For some cases, you need to be supervised, but they will train you in terms of doing bail appeal so that you can stand up in court right away and do a bail appeal. There's also a lot of work as it relates to substantive hearings that take place during the life of a case, particularly in district court. My experience is that's very motion oriented. A lot of people are overcharged. So you do file, after you get the discovery, you filed or on the papers just based on the police report. There's just not enough evidence to support the charge. You file motions to dismiss. You argue those motions in court. That's all prior to trial. There may be some discovery that may have been obtained unconstitutionally. So you may argue that you want to suppress statements, you want to suppress some evidence that was taken from your client. So you do help a lot while you're doing an internship at CPCS with, writing these motions. If you get a chance to second see during the trial, there's a lot of trials that take place. Also, you see the work of the attorney, with the investigator, with the social service advocate. Social service advocate can help from something as simple as doing a placement that someone has a substance use disorder, situation, condition, health, or it could be that doing like a psychosocial report so that you can provide a resolution to the case where, judges don't have a lot of information. So the more you can give information as to, and humanize your client in terms of how the person went from A to B to C. So that gives them some background in terms of like what happened and who is your client. And we may have a plan within the report that will be helpful in terms of obtaining the best resolution if the case is moving to a plea, particularly with very serious cases. the more information that you can provide to a judge about it, and also in terms of plan that the things that the client is committed to do, particularly that the client wants to do as opposed to be reporting posts, that's always going to be a better, I feel, a better outcome, because there's already a commitment on behalf of the client as opposed to just being, imposed by the court.
Great, yeah. And so today we do have with us Patricia Gould, who runs our externship program. So if you do have questions, when we get to the question and answer, Trish might be able to answer some of the questions if I can. But I think Tricia is your biggest resource here for externships. So Ron, you had mentioned the financial implications, which I think, my students come up to me sometimes because I'm so passionate about public service and being a prosecutor. Take us through what you were talking about, that you had to make this decision, when you were making $55,000 a year. What, you love the job that you were doing. What were some of the things that you had to consider? Did you always know you were going to come back to public service, or what were you thinking about when you had to make that decision to start making a little bit more money?
Thanks for that question. I mean, I should say, as you heard from the other panelists, that this was not ever like a real plan. It wasn't like, I'll do this, then I'll do this, then I'll do this. I mean, it's all over the place and really related to opportunity. And, at that point in time, along my 4 criteria, which I did not develop, which I did not come up with like years ago, when I was talking to a lot of people about transitioning out of the administration recently. I mean, I like the work. The time was a problem because we had 2 young kids and that was a lot to do. And I was not doing my favorite home. The money was not great, and my wife wanted to stay home, which I thought was a great idea. She did for a while. And I needed, and I knew I wasn't going to stay in the governor's legal office forever. I mean, the government's changed, and it was the kind of thing most people did for 2 years. So it was okay. It's time for me to leave. What do I want to do next, and how do I find something interesting? But obviously, it was about the money, but mostly it was about the fact that I was going to leave sometime, and it seemed like a pretty good time to move on because I've been here for 2.5 years. So, in the externship thing, just since I have the floor for a minute, I think there are 3 things that are great about that. One, as Vanessa said, is go to a place that you're interested in, finding out about and trying it out and learning what they actually do. 2, get some of the skills from the experience that you can do, whether it's standing up in court or research or writing, depending on where you go. And 3rd, by meeting people who really do it, and they will become hopefully friends and hopefully mentors, and people who throughout your career you get used as a resource, either as a sounding board or recommendation or whatever. But a lot of the things that I was able to do was because I had relationships with people that I met along the way. So when I think when you need to find an externship or internship, and you need to figure out how to fit that into your life, including financially, I think you should think about what the work you see, what the work you'll do, and who you'll get to meet.
And Genevieve, can you, really interesting that you brought up, you go to Stanford, you get these big law in New York and LA, and then you leave to volunteer before you end up in what sounds like for you just an amazing job when you're running the civil rights and the AG's office. But walk us through what were you thinking when you realized I'm going to give up this big law salary, I've got to do something else, I'm going to go volunteer for a campaign. But how did you make that decision?
The what were you thinking is basically what my parents said at the time. You're gonna make how much a name? I mean, I'll confess, it was also just a point of privilege to work at the law firm for so long and put me in a financial position to be able to say, I'm going to sort of take a break from a salary for a while. So I don't want to be sort of ignorant of that. That was a point of privilege. And I know not every decision comes with as much flexibility. But for me, I'd learned a ton. It had been a really stressful 6 or 7 years. And I don't know, sort of at a point where I had to decide to commit to the law firm. Do I want to get on the partner track? And is this really what I want to do with my life or not? It happened to be a really interesting political time. Like I said, there's this senator from Illinois who was running for president, and to me, I don't know, I had a sort of moment of like, I've got to get off this track and do something different, because this is not where I see myself going forever. And just that really sort of yearning to do something that was more meaningful to me. And that's not a judgment on law firm life. I think we can do really great work, met a lot of great people, but it just wasn't true to me. And so I sort of jumped off a cliff a little bit. Then from there, my salary just went down. I sort of started out went down, like sort of
job satisfaction really down.
yes, it did. To me, like there was like inverse. It's gone back up a little bit. So yeah, I just had to weigh those things. It was very tempting out of law school loans. And like I said, my dad had been a DA and a state court judge. And that was my model for lawyering. He didn't tell me you can go to a law firm and make a ton of money. Nor did he think I should have done that. It was very tempting, and then I just sort of had to figure out for myself where I fit in, and sort of work my way back to public service. But I don't know what's next for me. We'll see.
Could, I'll open it to any of the three of you. Can any of you talk about, or all of you talk about a internship, externship, some type of program that you had when you were in law school that made an impression? As I talked about when I was in law school and I did the Defender program, it was great that I did the Defender program because I realized I want to be a prosecutor. Can you talk about any program that you have that made an impression on your career?
Not during law school because I was working during law school. So I wish I could have done clinicals and whatnot, but I had to work to be able to go to law school. But prior to going to law school, when I was in college, I actually did an internship with CPCS as a Spanish translator for the office. And that's, I worked out of their Roxbury defender's office. And so I was right there in Roxbury District Court, and it was just fascinating just to go to court and see the attorneys litigating and fighting for their clients. So that's sort of how it happened.
Lon?
Yeah, I did an apprenticeship program in law school too, and I learned that I really liked stand up to important at that point. So that was important. And as I referenced before, when I was in college, I did quite section. I did these 2 internships in the governor's office up in Maine because I really was interested in the state government. And that was a chance to do all 3 of the things that I talked about. I got to see what that was actually like. I got to do some work and some research and policy memos, and I got to meet some great mentors who were my mentors for a very long time. It was I got hired by Governor Baker to do this job during the transition. So I went to a meeting at his campaign headquarters, and it was that meeting that really struck me like I had this job, which, and the people I had seen who had this job in the years before me, I thought that I had a very high opinion of them. So I couldn't believe I got the job. And I would still put me in that category, but I was driving home, like it was way before having got this wonderful job. And I called up the guy who was Chief Legal Counsel to the governor of Maine, for whom I had worked many decades before, and told him, David, I'm going to be Chief Legal Counsel of the governor. He was so happy. He was happier than I was. But it was a great moment because I always refer to him as my original mentor. He was a brilliant lawyer with his career between the public and private sector, and had a great sense of humor. That was sort of the model. And just to be able to go back a few decades later and tell him that he had actually been that kind of model for me because of the externship I had done, and I'd actually sort of followed in his footsteps, was great for both of us. So we thought, there's a lot in life and the world about relationships and where you go and who you meet. And it is a privilege and it is an advantage, but at the same time, you can make relationships and you can learn from everyone. So I never want to minimize that in sort of one's journey to go on, to spend time on that part of it.
Jean-Pierre, can you share something?
It's sort of similar. I think one of my favorite experiences in law school was doing a clinic. So I did a prosecution clinic actually with a local DA's office, and loved it. Felt like very grown up to like wear a suit to work and get up in court and all that. But it was an amazing experience. You just can't quite replicate without actually just getting into an office and working side by side with people. And it was really great to be in the trenches with like a handful of other students. Some of them are still really good friends. Just the other thing I'd highlight, even though it came like into my career, was my campaign work. That's something you can do earlier, you can do that in law school or other times. And that it sort of opened my eyes to a wide range of policy issues that really hadn't quite been as much on my radar before. So it was very eye-opening.
Right. And in addition to the externship programs, people when we talk about clinics, BC does have a prosecution clinic, which is a placement in Middlesex, and it's just for a semester. The defender clinic is the full year, and the defenders are in Middlesex too. Suffolk, and so the defenders are in Suffolk, but that's a full year program. So we are at the exact right time to open it up for questions. So please, and I think we have mics, so you've heard a lot, different types of experience, and I hope, and they're here to share whatever we can with you. Yeah, over here we've got a couple.
Try to go without.
Yeah, you got a nice. You'll be a good prosecutor.
So I guess this question is mainly for Lon. As someone who's interested in a potential in-house role later down the line in my career, what types of skills or experience would you say is necessary or desired to get those types of roles?
Well, I think when you think about the in-house world, I always think the in-house world is having two pieces to it. A company can either have a small staff, they have one or two lawyers, or they can have a big, bigger companies have big staff. And if you think about the bigger staffs first, they usually have two types of people. They have people who are experts in an area, as you could be in a law firm. So you could be a real estate expert, and you could work in-house instead of in a firm. Or you could be an employment law expert and work in-house. But also in the in-house world, there's the general counsel part. And that's really a generalist role. And frankly, that's the only thing I'm qualified to do. So I think you have to decide when you think about in-house work, do you want to go in as a specialist, or start as a specialist, or are you more interested in the general piece? As far as the academic side goes, obviously, I didn't do this, but you need a decent background in corporate structure, corporate finance, corporate tax, sort of the corporate core courses. I do think that there are, even if you want to be an in-house lawyer, I think there are benefits, not a necessity, but benefits to run a firm to start. I think you see a breadth of things in firms. I think you go to the lawyers in firms and you learn how to do good legal work. So I wouldn't discount going to a firm and doing corporate type things out of law school if you want to end up in-house. But then when you think about your house, you have to think about, do I want to be on the general side of things or on the specialist?
So I have a question about relationships. A couple of you mentioned that and how that's important. Just brass tacks, what's the best way for a young attorney to develop those relationships, or a law student? And what's the best way to develop those mentorships?
Give a short answer.
Yeah, but
My short answer is to say yes.
Right.
Okay. Someone asks, do you want to do something? Yeah. Would you like to try to work on this? Yes. I mean, not to your own detriment, not, but you have to try stuff, and you have to do a really good job at what you do. And if it's a boring little assignment to pile up some documents, do a good job on piling up the documents. And if it's a great assignment to shepherdize and research what happened in Marbury v. Madison, do a great job on that. But say yes and do good work, and that's how you develop a relationship.
John, you look like you were about to say something.
No.
Oh, okay.
I would agree with that. I'd say yes. I would say you don't know what relationships are going to be important. So I would maybe counsel against really trying to strategize that and sort of keep an open mind to developing relationships and treating people well in a wide range of circumstances. Yeah, and I would, I would also say that, like, a lot of us, like, busy people, I think if you're interested in developing relationships with certain people, take it on yourself. So show some initiative, do some of the work.
And I would add just kind of soft-spoken. I would add, first of all, reputation is extremely important. So make sure that, you, like Lon mentioned, do your work, do it well. In terms of relationships, I'm just I'm just gonna talk a little bit about in terms of litigation and being in court. Everyone has a job to do. The judge has a job to do, the prosecution has a job to do, defense, etc., probation officer. And you certainly want to be zealous and passionate about what you do. But you don't want to be extremely unpleasant for no good reason other than just because you feel that you need to be antagonistic because that's your role. Let's say if you're a defense attorney, because what you're doing is, first of all, you're doing a disservice to your client, because you're not going to get the best resolutions because the prosecution, they don't like you. And also because you never know. I mean, I've had other jobs where I have reached out to prosecutors for letters, reference letters and things like that, and I'm friendly with them. I've befriended cops also. So everyone has a job to do. Do a good job, and definitely your reputation, particularly when you're starting, is extremely important because it's a small community and word gets around that you're not a straight shooter. It's just not a good way to start your career.
Yeah, that's fair.
And I want to say a quick thing, because that's a mantra for me, for my students that I typically talk about is go to office hours, not just for the sake of going to office hours, so you can get to know your professors. And you're going to need, I've already been a reference for so many people, the OCIs, you've got to do on-campus interviews. You got to have a faculty reference, and how are you going to get that when you sit at the back of the room and you just looking down at your computer or your book and you're never raising your hand, and like the 1L electives, I don't know how many 1Ls there are. When you get in that 1L elective, the purpose of that elective is to learn some skills beyond the basic legal skills. You've got all of your doctrinal classes, but now you're going to get a class that you're going to need to participate, make presentations. And if that isn't your strong suit, hopefully you can start developing. You got to go to the professor and say, can you help me with this? For me, when people would come and ask me, when do you want to meet? I wanted to help people. Or we had a final presentation. I want to practice. Great. When do you want to practice? I can meet you here, or we can do it on Zoom. And the developing of that relationship is on you, really. I've got 42 students right now. I can't be calling each one of them up and say, hey, meet me for coffee. If they want to do that, I'm open to doing that. I've got office hours, and I've already said I'll do whatever you want to do to get to know my career or to get to know me. So you've got to take that on, because it is, I'm glad you asked that question, because it's just so important.
Hi, well, firstly, thank you for sharing all of your perspectives and your personal mission and vision regarding the trajectory of your career. But I just wanted to ask a question to all of you with such diverse experience. How have you been able to implement work in advocacy and policy creation and implementation while still being a practicing attorney within your field?
John, you've been doing a lot of policy work. What do you think of that?
Yeah, they're sort of all in my job description. So it is not sort of external. And that, to me, that's been actually really important. And one of the ways I think about the career, even though I mean it when I say I had no plan, I've never had a plan. But the way I've thought about it is sort of like building my toolkit. And that's what's helped me go from one job to the other, is it's not that it's a clear path to do this, to do that, but build your toolkit so that you are the most flexible. So when I think about, it's been important to me to do those mix of things, like litigate cases, work on legislative policy and other things. And really it's just, I worked in jobs where I've had a chance to do both. Can't always do both at the literal same time, but I've just kept an open mind to doing different kinds of things within those jobs. And then so my toolkit has sort of grown over time.
Lon, you've been in lots of policy jobs. How have you been able to integrate policy with practice?
Well, I mean, there are jobs that have policy as part of it, like some of my jobs, and then there are times that it doesn't have policy so much. But even when I had jobs that weren't public sector jobs, it's mostly through volunteer things and board work, I tried to stay involved both in things that had policy aspects to them and things that had local community ties. It was especially difficult when I was at BCG, because I'm flying all over the world. Sounds really great, but it's exhausting and it's tough to stay connected to the community. So during that time, I served on some of my JNC work on that time. I was on the board of the Greater Boston Food Bank and helped them with some of their legislative pieces. So as you think about your time, because it does come down to the allocation of your time and the mosaic of that, if your work doesn't give you a lot of policy aspects or a lot of the other, any aspects you want, and you have time, you can use your pro bono and volunteer commitments to try to get those. But I agree completely on the toolkit. I really agree on the point Vanessa made about reputation. But you know, being out and about to the extent that you can helps go to your toolkit, helps develop your reputation, and allows you to do the policy work. It's not even the HR.
Hi, I'm wondering about paths not taken. Maybe at some point early in your career, a choice, a job you chose not to take, something a friend or colleague did that you didn't, something in retrospect that you wish you would have done that may have opened up doors for you.
I would have to say, Attorney General, I had an opportunity for a position with the Attorney General's office, and just for, you know, personal reasons and issues that were going on in my personal life, I didn't take the job. And I would have to say that's one of the things, like looking back, that I regretted, because it would have been, you know, I've done mainly criminal defense, and that would have been a really good opportunity for me to also work on that side. And I mean, it was interesting work, but it just didn't work out.
Unfortunately for me, I've never said no, you know, because this IG thing, I could have said no. There was something else going on for me too at that same time, but you know, I didn't know if that was gonna happen, and this was something, you know, the AG and the first assistant felt like I was the person to do that. So, but there were other things, you know, when I was at the DA's office, everybody wants to go, you know, well, most people, they wanted to all go to the gang unit or the drug unit. And, you know, I get this opportunity to go to the child abuse unit, but the person who ran the child abuse unit was this guy named Dave Deacon, who is now a Superior Court judge, but Dave had a great reputation, talk about reputation. And I thought, I want to work with this guy because I want to learn things, and we're still friends, talk on the phone. And so, you know, those are the things that you've got to think about. If you are going to say no, like, what are you going to miss? And so for me, really, in, you know, a 30-year legal career, I really have never said no. Anybody else? I saw a lot of hands up before. Yeah.
Thank you all for being here. When you were getting started in your legal career, outside of law classes or legal related work, did you find other resources or experiences to be really helpful in shaping your perspective of the law or where you ended up today?
Vanessa, anyway, what do you think?
I was at Goodwill Proctor, I was working like 85 hours a week. I don't know, I have spent a lot of time also at the Boston Bar Association over my career. They have some young lawyers stuff, again, because I'm probably an extrovert and I like to be around people, and two, I like to meet people and learn from them. So, you know, the Mass Bar, the Boston Bar, some of the other affinity bars are good ways to supplement starting out, because you're just going to meet people who are on the one hand in the same place in their careers, you on the other hand have different and varied perspectives. So non-legal community groups are good too, because they get you away from the lawyer, and that's important to balance. But you know, I think you can. I think one thing to tell a young lawyer to do other than their personal life and their work, I would say, in the legal world, I would say do something with the bar association. It's because you meet lawyers of all different spots and experience.
One thing I would say is these kinds of programs too. You know, when I was in law school, I was a little bit older than everybody, obviously, because I had that 7 years in sales. But I think I got to learn a lot about different things. I would always go to like a program. You know, I was always interested in going to a lecture, and I'd ask questions, or you know, afterwards linger and ask the questions, not for the sake of asking questions, because I genuinely wanted to know more information. I think, you know, I'm just amazed in the 3 years I've been here, like the amount of programs and opportunities. You've got to take advantage of these things, and you go to a Rappaport one, they give you lunch or dinner, so that's even another reason, but just the other, and the last thing I would say is getting involved, because I was involved last year with this in the fall, somebody was on a sabbatical, advocacy programs, whether it's moot court or, appellate, the regular moot court, the appellate, all of the, I mean, I think there's about 15 different ones here. And to get involved in that, you're gonna not only meet whoever the instructors are, then the judges come, a lot of them are BC law grads, they come, they wanna kind of hang out and meet people. So you go to those programs and really just develop some skills, but also meet people too.
I just wanna say one more thing. Also, take advantage of informational interviews. Just contact someone. Now, if you're not sure about a particular career path, contact an attorney and tell them, you're a student at, BC Law, I'm looking into this area. Is there a chance that I can meet with you? So, I can get some information. I mean, I did that several times and I thought that was really helpful to me to do informational interviews. So don't be shy to do that. It's kind of awkward, I guess, at the beginning, just you don't know, but there's a lot of people in the legal community that are happy to help you, and if you don't do it, someone else is going to do it. So do it.
But I think Sarah probably can help out with that. Career centers, the Career Center probably has lots of alumni or even non-alumni that are willing to do this, and I think you've got to also use your professors for that, and that's the office hours doesn't have to be for this contract issue, I'm confused on it. It can be, can we talk about your career? Can we talk about any contacts that you might have so that I can learn a little bit about this?
Time for one more question.
Thank you so much for being here and for all your very helpful advice and perspectives. Going off of you all not necessarily knowing exactly what you wanted to do, how did you craft your law school career? Like as a 1L, not sure what I want to do. What do I study? What classes do I take? What electives? The externship programs and the clinics, very interested in, but what about everything else leading up or around it?
I don't remember having a lot of choice in my classes as a 1L, right? But I do remember throughout especially the first couple of years and trying lots of things. So I took some classes that were just way outside what I ever thought I might do, like an entertainment law class and some other things, just to see what's out there. You never know what you're going to learn in it. I also did some volunteering in law school. They still have street law for youth. Is that still a thing? No. All right. Well, it's been a minute. But we would volunteer to go to juvenile detention centers and work with youth, explaining their rights and educating them on seminar. Just I did a clinic. I also did summer associate jobs in the private sector. So just tried to do a really wide range of things to sort of figure out what sort of spoke to me.
Yeah, what I would add to that is that if you want to be on a litigation track, obviously there's some litigation techniques you can really do, like evidence and trial practice. You want to be on a corporate track, as I said, there are some corporate things you should do. Then I think you should look for a really good professor. Because, I mean, you have to be somewhat interested in this topic, but I think the tie should go to really good professors, because it's really about people thinking like a lawyer piece. And if you're interested in the content, whether it's entertainment law or advanced corporate tax or something like that, as long as you're interested in the topic, I would try to find people who get good marks from their students because they're interactive and engaging, and the content, sings. There was someone once said, "Good briefs marches and great briefs sing when they march." Professors who make the work sing is something that I would use as the tiebreaker. All the other things.
And one thing I want to say too on that is, if you are interested, Lon mentioned evidence. If you are, well, I keep talking about 303, so that's the provision through the SJC that you can practice law as a student, but you can't do it until you've passed evidence. So if you are interested in any kind of an internship or externship where you want to get in court, there are people in the DA's office, but they're in the appeals unit who don't have the 303. But if you want to be in the Roxbury District Court, standing up on arraignments, and maybe by the end of your externship or internship, get a trial, you've got to have the 303 certification, which really is essentially getting, getting passing grade evidence.
So on that note, I would like to bring this to a close. I want to thank Dean Bookbinder, who was integral in creating this panel. It wasn't just me. And I want to say thank you to Glenn, Vanessa, Lon, and Jean-Viet for sharing your incredible careers with all of us. And to let all of you students know, these could be your careers. You have the opportunity as BC Law students to interweave your own lives with the public, private, nonprofit sectors. You can do clerkships. You can go into so many different kinds of jobs. You could go into academia. You could become judges. There are so many paths for you to take. You could have come from being an English major, come from a STEM background. You could have come from biotech. The world is your oyster right now, really and truly. And these 4 incredible lawyers who have had longer, some less long careers are examples of what you can do throughout your career. So good luck to all of you. Come back to Rappaport Center programs, September 27th, raise some wrongful convictions. And as everyone says, meet people, network, bar associations, women's bar association. There are lots of different groups in many of the bar associations. Take advantage of every opportunity you have. So with that, thank you so much.